Hello, I'm Stuart Landon, Director of Community Engagement at Midtown Cinema, and we're really glad to have partnered with Susquehanna Art Museum to bring you tonight's film. I hope you enjoyed it, and for those of you that enjoyed it at home, I hope you enjoyed it there from the comfort of your couch. Of course, if you enjoyed it at the cinema, we hope you enjoyed it that you enjoyed our new seats and our new renovations at Midtown Cinema. We're very excited about that. Before we begin, a couple of announcements. First of all, if you have any questions for the filmmakers, please go ahead and text those to 717-219-4929. And I'll go ahead and have that scrolling across the bottom of the screen throughout the program. So please do text any questions that you might have. And with that, I'd like to introduce the Director of Education from Susquehanna Art Museum, Tina Sell.
Thank you, Stuart. I absolutely could not have done this without you, so thank you very much.
Oh, glad to have you, and it's just wonderful to have audiences again, right? You know, that's a big part of bringing people together. That's what the arts is all about.
It's such a relief that we have people who are ready to come out and meet us at Midtown Cinema and at the museum. And I just want to thank everyone who did come and see this. And those of you who are joining us from home, I can't wait to see you again in person soon too.
Absolutely. At any rate, you've got some special guests with you tonight, don't you?
I do. I can't wait to introduce them. I just want to thank real quickly Art Bridges, who is my program sponsor, who made it possible to bring AB to the cinema and to also bring my two special guests here tonight. The first is filmmaker Tim DePaepe. He is a University of Kansas film alumnus, whom Scott Bloch, the grandson of Albert Bloch, first asked to make this film in 1996. Tim agreed and served as his writer, director, and cinematographer. Tim has written and directed Blood of Me, an award-winning dramatic short, a 2001 documentary called Shades of Grey about 5 LGBTQ individuals living in Lawrence, Kansas, and contributed to a 1997 TV series called Split Screen. My second guest, Kelly H. Chong, PhD, is professor and chair of the Department of Sociology at University of Kansas, author of the award-winning book Deliverance and Submission, Evangelical Women and the Negotiation of Patriarchy in South Korea, as well as she has a new book, Love Across Borders, Asian Americans, Race, and the Politics of Intermarriage and Family Making, as well as numerous articles. They are currently collaborating again, working on a new documentary film on Asian Americans, racism, and mental health. Welcome to them. I wanted to start the evening, maybe Tim, with you. Okay. When you first began making this film, what moved you as being the most important part of Albert Bloch's story?
I think the real hook, the real link for me with this story was the idea, the notion of challenging a written, sort of the written art history and what we know of art history. Art history was kind of a passion of mine in college, and you know, a lot's been written about the Blue Rider. A lot's been written about people who are sort of in the chronicle of the great artists from that movement: Kandinsky, you know, Clay, Mark. And to me, nothing had been written really in depth about Bloch at the time we started this particular project. And then there was this exhibition that took place that started in Kansas City, Munich, and in Delaware. And so we started filming the exhibitions, and then slowly but surely, I think the main aspect of Bloch's work is that here is, you know, somebody who really, really could have been famous and deliberately chose not to be. I mean, it was an absolute conscious effort to sort of live the life that he lived. And I think in right now it's kind of hard for a lot of us to sort of wrap our heads around that notion.
So it took quite a few years to create the film. And maybe, Kelly, if you want to jump in at some point, I was wondering if your opinion of what intrigued you about Albert, about the mystery of who he was and why he sort of disappears from history. Did your opinion change about what was important to eventually just convey by the time you ended this film in this sort of long process?
Oh, I think, Tim, you have to start. Yeah. This movie has such a weird history. It's a very unusual history. So, I came in the last 5 years of the making. So Tim has the first 10 years that he could speak to that I can't. So I think you should get started on this question.
The movie took way longer than anybody anticipated to get finished. In many ways, I'm kind of thankful for that, because in a way it kind of worked to our advantage, because there was enough time to really be able to kind of reflect on Bloch, and enough people had sort of, since the mid-90s, when those exhibitions had happened, enough people had sort of had a chance to rediscover his work through private shows and private exhibitions. So I think we ended up with a much more present sort of idea of where Bloch is in the lexicon of modern art by taking the time that it did. In terms of, what has my opinion of him changed? I very much appreciate the later work more so than the earlier work. There's a lot of attention that's given to the earlier work. I see and sort of understand this guy who has he really is sort of painting himself in all of his work. If you get to know him and you get to kind of understand Bloch and his writings and his poetry, you really start to see the clues that are there in a lot, especially in the later works.
Quickly, I had a question from the audience member, and I'm guessing it's I can handle that. It's whether the film is available to stream at home because they liked it so much they wanted to watch it again. And yes, I can make that available to you through the museum. So if you get in touch with me, email me at the museum, then I can get you a link to that. Thanks to Tim.
We also are going to hopefully there is a website, albertblochfilm.com, and very shortly we're going to have a store set up where people can purchase the film there as well. We'll have Blu-rays and DVDs available.
That's great. Kelly, what do you think contributed most to Albert Bloch's nonconformist personality and lifestyle?
Oh boy, that's $1 million question. I really actually don't know if there is a definitive answer to that question at this even after the finishing of the film. Tim, feel free to jump in, but I don't know. I think there are probably a number of factors that we can't really, all of which we can't get at. I think one of the reasons that he retreated to Kansas after avoiding the fame that he could have pursued, I think there are some practical reasons there. Like, I think he was a dad and he had children. So practical reasons like, he has to support a family. It may be something as mundane as that in terms of explaining why, he retreated to Kansas. As far as, other reasons for conformist personality and lifestyle, let's see. I don't know, Tim, do you?
Well, I don't want to get in trouble, but for psychoanalyzing Albert Bloch or armchair, doing an armchair analysis of him, because he resisted such analysis. He would loathe it, what I'm saying here. But I think the real reason why he was such a nonconformist, and that he was rebellious and ornery right from the get-go. I mean, he didn't finish art school in St. Louis because he couldn't get along with his teachers. I think a lot of this stems from his father was very much an authoritarian, and he has, in some of his writings, it is indicated that when his father passed, he didn't really have too big of an emotional reaction to that. But when his mother passed, he was just overwhelmed with grief. So I think he was much closer to his mother than what he was his father. And so he was kind of always seeking out male sort of authority figures and then resisting them, at some point. I mean, you see that evolution with Reedy. He goes, finds this patron, this guy who supports him. Hey, he's going to send me to Europe. He goes to Europe, and while he's there, he does nothing but irritate Reedy with his paintings and stuff, with his drawings and his watercolors that he sent over, and some of his writings. I honestly think that Franz Marc was probably the most significant sort of paternal figure he had in his life. And when Marc died in World War I at the Battle of Verdun, I think he was traumatized. I mean, again, I'm avoiding this whole analytical sort of aspect of this answer, but I honestly think that he had no way of. A lot of people at that particular point of the turn of the century had no way of understanding and dealing with the level of carnage and the level of destruction, mechanized destruction at that particular time in history. And I think when he came back from Germany and settled in the Midwest, I think he was trying to do everything he could to just sort of retreat from a lot of these sorts of angst-ridden feelings that he had, a lot of the angst and a lot of the emotional trauma and emotional tumult that he was feeling at that particular time. I don't think he really had much of a way of resolving a lot of these sorts of issues, except in his artwork at that particular time.
There seemed to be such a repetition, like a motif of exclusion. There was the sort of, as you mentioned, his father, and I think just living as an immigrant in the U.S. At that period of time, right before the First World War, and then kind of going over to Germany and being kind of excluded from that society of painters in Germany. There seemed to be a kind of motif of isolation, and I was thinking that had to have some additional toll, in why you start making choices that keep people kind of guessing,
Yeah, I think, if you kind of look at the artwork, some of the early work, and kind of through the various different kinds of periods of his life, there is very much a searching in terms of themes of in some of the more darker sort of dour paintings with the shrouded women's and stuff like that. There's a sense and a feeling of isolation and foreboding, but at the same time, during that same period where he's painting, he does this painting that is probably my favorite, which is we use in the artwork on the poster, which is a painting called Garden Scene, which is vibrant and brilliant and beautiful. So I think there's this constant dichotomy that's going on with Bloch in every single phase of his life. I think, so does that answer your question?
Yes. We have a question and a comment from the audience. The comment first was that all three of us happen to be in rooms with yellowish backgrounds. Do you think that Albert Bloch would think that would have some sort of meaning?
I'm sure it has some sort of meaning, but I can't tell you what it is.
I can't either. The question was, which segment of Bloch's career was more interesting to interpret, the European or the American context, and why?
Well, the American aspect of it is more interesting to interpret, and I only wish I could have gotten in. Everybody would love this. I think there's a lot of people who would love this to be like a 2-hour movie, but there's just no way I feel like you can do 2 hours on Albert Bloch. But it's the American period where I think, like I've said, where the work becomes much more interesting. I mean, he starts playing around with interesting literary themes in some of the later work. Like another one of the great paintings, and you see it in the film, is called Faust and Job, where he takes the story of Job and the story of Faust, and he kind of combines them in this sort of almost operatic kind of weird, darkish tale that's going on in that painting, and that it's a large painting, and when you see it, it's kind of overwhelming. But also, in seeing that, if there was a way to see that painting up close in person, you start to see the technique that Bloch is developing, and he's developing this painterly technique in which he's using little strokes over the upper layer of the paintings, and it's almost like a veil. There's like this constant like putting a veil in front of your face, and I think that in Bloch's sort of spiritual quest that he's dealing with in the later part of his life, he's looking at these paintings in some way of sort of like lifting the veil on some sort of higher power.
Anna, in the film, Anna kind of says she feels that he had a sense that people ought to see his work. I was wondering who in his later work he was painting for. Was he doing it as a catharsis? Was he, did he have an audience in mind? I wonder, when he was exploring those themes.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say that Bloch was very close. Well, he was very close to only a few select people in his life, especially later in his life, and I think he only painted for himself and Anna, and maybe a couple of very, very close compatriots that he had in Lawrence, Kansas. And I think that was it. I honestly don't think he cared too much about what the art world thought of his work.
I think that
that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, I think that we can't really underestimate the level of megalomania that's kind of involved in here, because he did write. I use that word because he did write a poetry, right? What was the title of it?
Megalomania.
Megalomania, which was at the beginning of the movie. That part was from his movie about the mousetrap maker. So he definitely had this sense that he had enormous talents, and that he was painting. He was being very true to himself, and what he was doing was very pure, and that at the right time that he was going to be discovered. And that people were going to be seeing his paintings, but he didn't want to become involved with the art world and sell his soul and all of that. And Anna, his widow, very much became the keeper, and protector of his art and legacy, of course. So I think there was a little bit of that as well, which shows up in a lot of his poetry. So he's a very complex character, but then I don't know, that just maybe goes with the artistic talent, personality.
I think there was another question. I saw something pop up. Maybe I was wrong.
I don't see one. now. You mentioned his poetry, and I wanted to ask, you definitely made a decision to not have a narrator sort of to speak over the film, but instead have his words tell his story. Do you want to kind of talk about that?
Yes. There's a couple of things I can say in reference to that. Bloch almost wrote every day of his life. Prior to going to Germany, while he was in Germany, and after he came back. And Anna Bloch, who I got to know in the course of making this film, handed me copies of Bloch's writings. And the amount of stuff that I collected over the years will fill a small section of a room, like a fairly large closet. And so with this sort of morass of information on all of his words there was just no other way to really tell Bloch's story other than let him tell it. And so I think within very few exceptions do we sort of cut and paste certain things together to kind of make it a little bit more seamless in the flow. But there was one cut of the film in which I really wanted to fold more of the tenets of expressionism into the actual telling of the story as a documentary, and we got a little bit more experimental with it, and that was kind of early on. And in some of that, I'm taking Bloch's words and interpreting them in a way that I think what he means. And of course, the various arts historians that were involved in the project just kind of lost their minds about that. So we ended up kind of excising that from the film. But it was a conscious choice to let Bloch tell its words. It was a conscious choice to use the actor we used to perform the narration in the film. Holmes was my first choice, and he was the only choice I wanted. So we were lucky to get him. He wasn't other people's first choice, but he was definitely mine. So
you knew him. He was sort of a someone who represented the region that Bloch was from, right? He
had that quality of voice. He had that tonality in his voice. It was very Midwestern, but and lovers of independent films would recognize Holmes if they saw him, because he's been in every single film that Richard E. Kelly has ever directed, and he's been in every single film Tom Hanks has directed. So,
do you have? You were mentioning that the process of getting this film to realization took longer than anybody thought it would. Do you have anything other challenges that sort of popped up that you weren't expecting or of note that were of interest?
Well, funding is always the big challenge. The biggest challenge with this film was trying to find the funding from the standpoint of here was a great American artist that nobody ever heard of. And so a lot of the traditional funding channels at that particular time, people just didn't seem really all that interested in it. It's real easy to go out and talk to various different entities that love to fund these types of projects about art. If you mention the names of Thomas Hart Benton, if you mention George Caleb Bingham, if you mention John Stewart Curry, all of these other sorts of great Midwest American regionalists, but Albert Bloch, he was just seen as kind of a footnote. So anyhow, I think that the funding aspect of this film really it ran out of gas by the mid 2000s, and so the film was just kind of stagnant. And then about 2013, 2014, I was trying to revive it a little bit. And then Dr. Chong sort of looked at the project, and she was able to sort of help us unpack the idea. And then she was key in helping get that final push of funding there to get the film over the finish line.
Thank goodness. So we do have an additional question. Does mention the sort of relationship that Albert shared between Anna and Hortense, and that sort of lack of transition between the two. that sort of remains questionable in their sort of Midwestern life.
That's a good question. And one of the great things about having the artist's grandson ask you to make a film about his grandfather is that it's very flattering. One of the drawbacks is that sometimes you can't dive into the questions that everybody wants to know. I can tell you just from personal experience, having talked to Anna Bloch, and sitting one-to-one, and her mouth to my ears, what she said about the situation with her, Hortense, and AB all living in the same house together was that, AB loved Horty. He adored Horty. It's just that they had just grown apart, and AB had other interests, that, Horty wasn't involved with anymore, and they, all of that. And, Anna started off as AB's secretary, and the relationship evolved from there. She started, as student secretary, and then life partner, wife type of evolution. And was it a perfect, happy little dynamic going on in a small Midwestern town? No, not at all. There was, there was a lot of people that just sort of, raised their eyebrows. It raised a lot of eyebrows. There are people still today in Lawrence, Kansas, you run into who, someone who will talk about that relationship, and they have things to say.
Sure.
I mean, it's small town Midwestern Kansas.
Yeah. There was, in the beginning of the film, there was mentioning when we met sort of his family, how they felt like they had to leave some of their experiences as immigrants from their previous lives behind, and that included religion. I got a text from someone who was wondering about AB's spiritual leanings. What do we know what he sort of maintained, if he still had religious feelings that he came through? And I know spiritualism was kind of part of the process of those painters as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Again, there are clues to all of that and all of his later work. AB, he was born Jewish. The parent, because of the time, his father sort of renounced the religion, or became non-practicing. I think that's also another big part of AB's journey, is that he's struggling to find that greater answer. He was very much a Christian. I mean, he adopted Christianity as his religion. He was married in a Protestant church. Both weddings were Christian weddings. His marriage to Hortense, and then his marriage to Anna. They were, again, I think you can see like a lot of the imagery he's struggling with, the weeping Christ. You see lots of images of crucifixions, especially in the Blue Bow. he I think found a way to sort of resolve these issues through his own sort of inward journey that he was making. You know, I think in some ways, coming back from Europe after World War One, he was trying to sort of repair that part of himself.
Yeah, I can imagine the sense of confusion and loss and not knowing really where to put all of those kind of spiritual questions that you know he was internalizing.
Tina, I'm kind of glad that you brought up that question about religion, because Tim, if you recall, that was an aspect of the film we almost left out, right?
Yeah.
About the fact that he was Jewish. And at some point, I felt like it was really important that we relate to the audience the fact that he was Jewish, whatever you want to make of it, because nobody's really sure of what kind of struggles he was going through, internal struggles about his religion. We just knew that he rejected Jewishness when he was growing up, but it didn't seem right to leave out that aspect of his biography. There had to be some importance to it. In terms of his development, psychological development. So I'm glad that it kind of rang something for you. Yeah.
I have another question. What was the culmination of the correspondence between Kandinsky and Bloch, and how does it reflect on Bloch's work?
Another excellent question. First of all, I'll point out that if anybody's interested in that correspondence, in looking at that in-depth correspondence between Bloch and Kandinsky, it's all available through the Smithsonian online. Bloch, the little section that we put in the film, that represents the last correspondence they had between each other. Bloch always admired Kandinsky, admired a lot of what he was doing in the world of the non-representational, but he rejected a lot of Kandinsky's ideologies later on, post Bauhaus, and he. Again, I think that speaks to that sort of Bloch's cantankerous and ornery sort of attitude and impetus to reject men in authority over him. I don't think there was the only person he ever listened to with any real depth, the person he cared about, whose opinion he cared about, was honest. He just honestly didn't care. There's another letter out there from the Mark Twain Society that they wanted to give him this award, for some of his history and cartooning, and then just these there's people in St. Louis that wanted to give him this pretty significant honor, and he wrote this scathing letter rejecting it. Insulting these people. So that I think speaks to who he was to the very end.
Mm-hmm. And that need to sort of, to buck the system and to sort of, insult those people that he's supposed to be seeking validation from.
I think the thing that is still fascinating to me about Albert Bloch is, the only way to put it is a certain level of self-awareness the man had. In that poem that we start the film off with, as Kelly pointed out, it's entitled Megalomania. He saw this inward journey that he was making in the attic of Lawrence, Kansas, as just the most megalomaniacal move that he could make. Mm-hmm. And that's how he wanted to succeed at it. And art world be damned. You like his paintings, you like his paintings.
Yeah, I'm wondering, how common that was amongst modernist painters, to jump off that cliff where so many of them were completely abandoning, what aesthetics were, what we understood the purpose of art to be. I think they had to embrace that, because I think on some level rejection was so much part of that process, especially the early modernists.
True.
I'm getting another text. Did he have any shows in America during his life? We know you mentioned one in Delaware. I know there was one in Chicago.
Very shortly after he returned from Europe in like 1910, 1911. I may have the dates wrong, so the historians out there might jump on me on this one. But he had an exhibition in New York at the Daniel Gallery. And he also had another exhibition in Chicago at what is now the Chicago Institute of the Arts, the Chicago Art Institute. Mm-hmm. And Arthur Jerome Eddy just wrote about him in his book on German Expressionism and referred to Bloch as the greatest American artist to date. So, he did have significant exhibitions. And since the 1996 exhibition, after Scott Heffley did the great giant restoration, the amazing Scott Heffley, the conservator at the Nelson Atkins, who has dedicated his life to preserving the Bloch legacy. He's now head of the Albert Bloch Foundation. Scott, has cared for all of these paintings, and ever since that particular exhibition in the 90s, there's been one gallery show after another gallery show after another gallery show over the years. Not a year goes by without you seeing something happening with Bloch.
Yeah, he didn't have any while he was alive, did he?
No, nothing significant while he was alive, except those that I just mentioned, the two, one in Chicago and the one in New York.
I have one last question. You end the film with A.B.'s words, "Give the picture time and it will tell all there is to be told." I thought that was a really fitting quote to be those last words kind of ringing. I felt like it summed up his story. Can you talk about that decision?
Well, again, I give Dr. Chung all the credit on that one, because that was her pick. She pulled that one.
Did I find that? I can't even remember. I think throughout this film, I came in late to this, so I didn't understand Albert Bloch or the history of this filmmaking, as obviously as Tim did. So I was trying to really figure out this guy, in every way possible, and he just he was just such a mystery in every way. Trying to figure out, what did his paintings mean? It's what did the second half of his painting, second half of his life, the painting in second half of his life mean, his American era. And so I think when I found this quote where this is from, it just really kind of encapsulated for me what he was about, that, he really didn't expect anybody to really understand his paintings, right? His idea was that, everybody really has will take whatever they can from what they see. Everybody will have different perceptions, and that he wasn't really expecting anybody to understand anything. And if they could just get some sense of their own truth from looking at his films, then that would, be the end goal. He didn't. I think he saw that trying to convey some sort of truth to anybody was a pointless exercise, obviously. So I just thought, and that really brought home to me that how I was approaching this whole film was kind of off the mark, that I shouldn't be trying to understand why this, why that so much. That at the end of the day was really about the mystery, and maybe you can't really understand everything. And I think that's what he was trying to do with his paintings, and I think ultimately that's what we were trying to do with the telling of this film. That we let the audience decide what they think about Albert Bloch and his paintings. Am I kind of on the right track there, Tim?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, pretty much. you know, that was kind of a last minute alteration in the editing of the film, putting that piece in. In fact, we had to actually go drive out to Holmes's house in Odessa, Missouri, which was a place I've never been to, and actually record that in his living room basement. To me, that sort of statement in that particular writing, in that essay of Bloch's, kind of sums it up. It's like, the story of Albert Bloch, this documentary, all the little nuances of Albert Bloch's life and everything else like that lead to the point where the painting is done and hanging on a wall are insignificant. What's important is that the painting's hanging on the wall and it's there for you to look at. It's the work that should take presence over anything and everything else. His life story is irrelevant to what you're looking at.
And I think it rings true for all museum goers to have this dialogue with an artist that's not there, and something that an artist has to kind of accept, that you're creating this dialogue and yet you're letting it go and for everyone's interpretation. That's for me, as a museum person, as an art ed person, it's a comfortable place for me to kind of sit in these areas that have no black and white answers. But I know for a lot of people, that's not a very comfortable place to be.
Right.
I have a question. Did his great-grandson ever become an artist? I know he was featured in the movie.
I've got two answers to that question. No, his great-grandson has moved into the financial sort of realm. And Peter Bloch, who's in the film, again, that was another find by Dr. Chong. I had no idea Peter Bloch was an artist.
Scott Bloch never told us that one of his sons was an artist. Apparently there's another one who's in the arts field. And so I found him by while I was Googling something about the Blochs, and then Peter's name popped up, and then he had this page where he was talking about his grandfather and how he was inspired by his grandfather's paintings. And I said to him, Scott Bloch has a son who's an artist inspired by his grandfather, and he hasn't told you about it in 10 years. So we independently got in touch with him and asked him about it. And it took a while to convince both of them, the father and the son, to be in the film, but ultimately they agreed. And so that was, I think, a really good thing that happened.
Yeah, I had actually broached the topic with Scott about putting Peter in the film, and he kind of hemmed and hawed. And he goes, "I'll get back to you." He never got back to me. And I was shooting something in Texas at the time, and it turned out that I was just where I was staying in Texas was like 15, 20 minutes away from where Peter was. So I just grabbed my camera and equipment and just went over one night and shot an interview with Peter. And that's how Peter ended up in the film. I just put Peter in the film. I didn't tell Scott I was doing it. Scott found out that Peter was in the film when he watched it. So, an interesting thing though, Scott J. Bloch, who is the whole reason this film exists, and I'm a part of it, he and his brother William are both attorneys. Scott's a fairly successful attorney in Washington, D.C. Well, they're both very successful. And William's a successful attorney in Hollywood. And they both grew up in Woodland Hills, California, which is near Hollywood. And because it turns out that Albert Bloch's youngest son, he had two sons, Bernard and Walter. Walter wanted to be an artist, wanted to be an actor and an artist, and had some success in New York on Broadway. In fact, he had the same representation and agent as Tennessee Williams. And Walter was actually getting a lot of traction. But he and his father had this weird sort of estranged relationship that nobody really discusses and talks about in great detail. So Walter ended up moving to Los Angeles and working in Hollywood as a writer. And he changed his last name to Black. So there's all these screenplays and teleplays. He actually ended up writing for the golden pantheon of television in the late 1950s and 1960s. Under the name Walter Black. He wrote for Bonanza, High Chaparral, Adam 12. He wrote for Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch. I mean, you know, he wrote some pretty significant and classic episodes of those shows. But, you know, to me, it was, you know, that's one of the more fascinating aspects of the story. I wish I would have been able to kind of go off on that tangent and tell, because here it is, here's this artist who was constantly struggling with his own identity and his own spiritual quest and, you know, his inward spiritual truth. And he has this son who's really having all of this really, really sort of almost grandiose commercial success. And, you know, it's just like there's this balancing act. In fact, Walter, because he wrote for the General Electric Live Playhouse Theater, he wrote a teleplay about A.B. Called The Accidental. The name escapes me. Sorry.
Accidental Artist?
It was the accidental something, not the accidental tourist. That's a whole other thing. But you know, anyway. But it was actually shot and done live on television, and A.B. had actually seen it. And actually saw it. And I tried to get Anna to talk about it. I've tried to get other people to talk about it, and they wouldn't. I was able through in the UCL archive to find a portion of the draft that was submitted to the Writers Guild, but you know, and I toyed with the idea of working. So there was just no way to really work it in terms of our narrative, but there are very interesting and revealing things in it.
You didn't tell me you found the portion of the draft. I thought we couldn't find it at all. It was lost forever.
Yeah. Well, we did find a little portion of it. I had forgotten. Well, it was one of those ideas I think I had just ejected. So.
Well, you know, the thing about this sort of the modernism umbrella is that, you know, now as we're trying hard to be as inclusive as possible and retelling different narratives, the story of modernism is just getting bigger and wider and deeper than we ever thought it would be. I mean, we have whole museums devoted to it, and yet we realize just how much was excluded from that story. So you know, I think it's been fascinating through the process of putting on the Modernists as an exhibition and really spending a lot of time with these artists that I studied, you know, that are sort of, you know, big names in terms of modernism, and also seeing them right next to people who went their whole lives without any kind of recognition. You know, Alma Thomas, you know, the whole experience of Black Americans during that period of time had sort of just existed on some different page and some different story. You know, it was never included. And women, you know, Kata Kolvitz was sort of just kind of erased. And so it is kind of, it's been a wonderful aspect of our work with this exhibition, including Bloch, is sort of telling stories that almost kind of slipped through the modernism cracks, and realizing that the further you dig, the more there is.
One of the things that I think really excited me in the later phase of filming in this, like all of the stuff in Chicago with David Raskin, and getting his position on it, it just sort of kind of broke the story open a little bit more. And it is definitely interesting sort of to think now about, you know, not just art history, but history in general, just all of the various different stories that have existed, the reality that is out there that we don't know about. You know, and I would like, there still hasn't been a definitive piece done on Gabriel Muenter. or even I don't even know if there's really been that much of a definitive exhibition of her work, even in Germany. So
there's still time. Well, thank you both for being with us this evening. And, you know, it's so important for me and for our museum goers to be able to talk to artists, to talk with creators and storytellers, because it just helps us connect more with the work that we get to see. And our exhibition is, you know, up for another week, and I hope people will continue to come out and catch Albert Bloch's Duel. I know that this is the first time that this film's sort of been shown in such proximity to that painting in particular. And I just wanted to thank you for making the film and for
thank you for showing it. I'm just heartbroken I can't be there in person because it looks like a wonderful theater, looks like a wonderful museum. Harrisburg looks like a wonderful little city, and so yeah.
We love Pennsylvania. We love Philadelphia.
We love that area of the country. So
well, you're always welcome. We try really hard.
Yeah, there was a little thing standing in the way of us getting there, like the apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're on the tail end of the apocalypse, if that's a real thing.
Yes.
All right, you guys be well.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.